Hey, everybody. It is that time again. I've got Patrick McQueen with Medalist Legal with me today. And Patrick, thank you so much. I just so appreciate you. I know you've been around town as a real estate attorney for now, I don't know, like what, 20 years?
Thanks for rubbing it in.
Anyway, so thank you so much just for spending time with me. You're so just not only resourceful, but helpful and kind of just sharing important information to get it out to the real estate community. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Yeah. So today I wanted to talk about these pending lawsuits out there with regard to real estate commissions, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on this. So I know that they haven't gone to trial yet. I know that there's been some settlement. So I just like to bring some basic information to the real estate community and what do real estate agents need to know today about the pending litigation.
Yeah, I even had to take some notes for this because there's literally some changes that we found out about last night and this morning, and I'll kind of get into that. But at present, what we have are several large class action lawsuits against the National Association of Realtors, against some of the biggest brokerages in the nation, real estate brokerages in the nation, against some MLSs. And there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of people who don't understand the basis for these lawsuits. But again, the plaintiffs are a large group of home sellers from around the country. The defendants are, again, the National Association of Realtors, some of the largest brokerages, and then some MLSs. And the plaintiffs, these homeowners, these former sellers of homes, are basically making the argument, and I'm going to keep it real basic here, that sellers in general should not have to pay a commission to both their listing agent and the buyer's agent, because that's what is traditionally done. And the argument is also that sellers don't really have a say in that, and therefore, because they don't have a say in who gets paid and how much, that it's somehow price fixing or antitrust or just this big fraudulent scheme by all of these parties, all of these defendants that I just mentioned. And so what the plaintiffs are largely seeking, and again, I've overstated it or understated it, however you look at it, it's not exactly how it is that they position in these lawsuits, but that's the gist of it. But what they're seeking are changes to the way in which real estate agents practice in Arizona and nationwide, and they're seeking, millions of dollars in damages. And the NAR is defending themselves, and they're basically saying, look, the current rules direct a listing broker to determine in consultation with their seller clients the amount of compensation to offer for a buyer's agent. There's the ability of a buyer's agent to negotiate that compensation. So there's a lot of back and forth, and we don't know how this is really going to turn out. And because of some adverse rulings to the real estate community in some of these cases, in two of these cases, a couple of the larger real estate brokerage companies, the sort of owning entities, have actually settled recently, and they've settled for large amounts. What we don't know is the exact amount of those settlements. There's speculation all over the place of between 50 and 85 million or something to that effect. And as part of these settlement agreements, there is speculation that these brokerages are going to change their practices, but we don't know that. We just don't know that. The NAR, the National Association of Realtors, has said, we're not interested in settling. There's nothing to settle. We believe this is an appropriate practice, and we're not going to settle. And we're going to go to trial. And in one of the cases, there was a trial that was scheduled, I think, for October of 2023. I think it got bumped. There's also one scheduled at the beginning of 2024 that's probably going to get bumped too, which happens. But so there's a bit of uncertainty in connection with what's going to happen here. And so there's a lot of real estate agents who are very concerned, and they're wondering, hey, is there something else I can do to make sure I get my commission or something to that effect? And there's stuff that they can do. This may change the industry a little bit, but I don't think it's the end of the world.
That's great. Did y'all hear that? Not the end of the world. It just could change the process or how it's going to work in the future. One of the things that I am just concerned about what you and I spoke about. But, if we have a buyer, especially in today's market, who, can barely pay for their down payment and their closing cost, and that could, in some cases, just be wiping them out, or they're getting a gift from a family member or relative, or they're using down payment assistance, to expect that they're going to have additional funds that they're not obligated to pay now, because essentially it's built into the price of the house. Let's just call a spade, right? I mean, the set price is based on a set amount of commission. Part of that goes to the buyer's agent, part of that goes to the listing agent, and that's how it works, but it's not directly impacting buyers. So if this does change, I just think that there's going to be the haves and the have-nots. There's going to be some buyers that just will not be able to afford representation. Do you have any thoughts on how that might play out?
I think that's a pretty ugly consequence, or has the potential to be pretty ugly. Irrespective of the affordability issue, there's going to be some buyers out there, and they're going to be unrepresented, and they're not going to use an agent. That's an option that they have, but I think that is going to be possibly pretty detrimental, because these buyers may not understand what's going on. They may not be able to get a good deal, and then they're going to point the finger at the seller or the seller's agent when this was their choice to do this. So it's going to affect the subset of folks who already have an affordability issue, and it's also going to affect people who just say, "Well, I guess I don't need an agent then, because I don't want to pay that cost." So yeah, that's a problem.
And then let's talk about the MLS, because that's also a big part of this conversation from what I've read. And so, if you're listing the house in MLS, and let's say you're choosing not to use a real estate agent because you can't afford to, if this actually does become a regulation, then, consumers don't have access directly to the MLS. So again, I think we're creating disparity. They have access to other types of platforms that do bring listings to the table, but those platforms are not all inclusive of all listings. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's even talk that some of the big brokerages are going to start their own MLS, and so you're right. There's an access issue. There's a efficiency issue. I mean, what we've got now is a pretty efficient market that works pretty well, and so we're just clubbing that out of the whole mix. So to me that just presents too big of a challenge for access, for affordability, and this was done. The whole setup that we have now was to avoid this sort of sub-agency concept, where we used to have this sub-agency sort of setup where a buyer's agent would actually be a sort of a sub-agent or a co-agent of the selling agent. Well, we wanted to avoid that because fiduciary duties, et cetera. And now we're going back to this system where there may not be anybody represented. That's potentially very problematic and harmful.
And then you kind of get into the whole concern with dual representation, because this may lead to more of that, which I think there's already, some concern, like you said, with regard to who you truly represent in a dual agency type of scenario.
Well, as a real estate attorney, I usually don't like the idea of dual representation, and now this is seemingly
most brokers do not. They're like the same thing.
And so we're sort of treading down the path of that or nothing, or it's like it just doesn't make sense to have a scenario like that. I think it's ultimately going to be harmful for the consumer as opposed to helpful.
And so we think about solutions. Both you and I are solution-oriented professionals. When we think about solutions, like what could be a solution that may or may not be on the table right now?
Well, I know that in some places, what people are doing is they're calling the buyer's agent's commission a seller concession, or they're asking for a seller concession in the contract. So the buyers could turn around and just start asking for the agent's commission as a part of a seller concession. Now, Fannie, Freddie, you know the analysis on this. They have limits on the amount of concessions that can be granted and provided. So there probably have to be some sort of policy change. But in some states, they're already doing that. Now, I don't know if in those states they're doing it because of these lawsuits, or they're just doing it because they think it's a good idea. But that to me is one option. Another option is, and we're not there yet, but it would be for buyers to finance. Fannie and Freddie would have to allow buyers to finance the agent's commission. And with interest rates where they're at, I don't know, buyers may be, less inclined to do something like that, at least at this point. And then the other option, which is what most agents are calling me about and sort of saying, hey, can you provide some documentation, or what would this look like, is actually a reboot of the relationship between a buyer and a buyer's agent. So they're redoing the buyer broker agreement, reworking that relationship, and almost turning it into a client relationship where you have retainers, where you have an hourly rate, where you do flat fees based on how many houses you show. And so that's an option too. And that's seemingly where a lot of agents are starting to ask the questions. What I don't like about this as well is this almost seems like a race to be the cheapest, or it's going to turn into a race to be the cheapest. And so you're really, those agents that are out there are really going to have to sort of show that they know how to be a buyer's agent, that they have the skill, that they're selling value as opposed to price. So, it's a race to be the cheapest, and that's never good.
Yeah. And, the thought about financing the commission, that wouldn't be financed into the home loan. That would have to be financed with some other vehicle. And so with that, then remember that payment would get calculated into the debt to income ratio for the borrower that's qualifying. And right now, the way that the guidelines stand, you can't borrow money for a down payment. Not that this would be a down payment. This would be borrowing money to get representation. So how that looks in the lending guidelines, we'd have to explore and better understand based on each different category of guidelines out there. So yeah, so much. This is not an easy kind of answer. There's no easy solutions, but I do think just kind of all of us coming together and thinking about it and knowing that it exists without really knowing where it's going to go is just important. So I thank you so much today for joining me. Any closing thoughts?
No, if people want to see kind of what these retainer agreements look like, or if they want to see what an hourly fee agreement looks like, or a flat fee agreement, I'm happy to provide those, with the caveat that if you're going to use something like this, you absolutely need to run it by your broker before you do. Don't just go and start using it. But some agents just kind of want to see what that looks like and calculate maybe how much they can make, or how much each transaction is going to cost, or how they want to price themselves. I'm happy to provide it for those purposes. But again, if you're going to use something like that, don't rely on the document I'm providing, rely on the broker's input, because a lot of the brokerages in Arizona and elsewhere are affected by the lawsuit. And so we want to make sure that nobody's, putting their foot in the wrong place.
And even though these lawsuits are likely going to impact the nation, keep in mind that Patrick is a real estate attorney here in Arizona, so he's certainly leaning more towards Arizona law and business practices. So if you're a real estate agent at some other place here in the country, be sure to talk to your broker and get representation or advice that impacts your state. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, 100% agree.
And the reason I share that is because we now land in 45 states plus Washington, D.C. So we are starting to have a bigger reach, and we're having more real estate agents tune in, which is fantastic. We love it. But just want to make sure we're setting the tone that you are here in Arizona. So that's what you're speaking to. Patrick, as always, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you.
You got it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.